Good afternoon. What an honor it is to be here. My name is Andrea Leiner. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Global Response Management.
And I'm Skeeter Welder. I work for Massachusetts General Hospital Center for Disaster Response and Humanitarian Action.
So the United Nations estimates that there are 563,000 people displaced in Mexico. These are people fleeing violence, poverty, civil and political unrest. Many come from Central and South America, but increasingly Mexican border towns are becoming bellwethers for the events going on in the world. We have people coming from countries like Haiti, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Cameroon, and now Russia. The migration crisis in northern Mexico is just that, it's a crisis. The most vulnerable people fleeing unimaginable circumstances are living in the streets with little to no access to basic needs, including healthcare. Global Response Management, or GRM, is a veteran-founded medical NGO specializing in medical care and training for populations who are displaced by conflict or disaster. We combine academic medicine with military medicine and pre-hospital medicine to define what it is to respond in high-risk, low-resource environments. And while it might seem surprising for a veteran-founded organization working in conflict zones like MGH, Global Response Management is a women-led organization. So how did an NGO working in war zones like Iraq, Yemen, and Ukraine end up on the US-Mexican border? It's because nobody else came. And the areas where people are stuck in are some of the most dangerous areas in the world, particularly for women and children who are exploited by organized crime. GRM, in partnership with Mass General Hospital, has been working in Mexico since 2019, when an informal refugee camp formed in Matamoros as a result of the asylum process closing. Unlike other countries we respond in, there is no WHO or UN cluster response there. There's no governmental financial support for NGOs working on the Mexican side of the border. Meanwhile, our patient numbers are steadily increasing. OB visits, emergency cases, chronic illness, pediatric illness. We're projecting that over the next 2 years, we'll see more than 40,000 patients. Many days it can feel like an insurmountable problem for a small NGO, but thanks to amazing partners we work with like MGH, we are made bigger. To meet the need for access to care on the border, GRM and MGH's Global Disaster Response Team have committed through the Clinton Global Initiative in 2022 to continuing to address the humanitarian crisis on the border by providing basic healthcare services to migratory and refugee populations in 3 ways. 1, we're going to increase provider numbers for direct care. Right now, our clinics see more than 100 patients per day, and it's not enough. There's still a line at the end of the day. We're going to ensure consistency of that access to care. It is so important that we are open every day because we're often the only safety net for people that are there. We're also going to increase specialty services, specifically in maternal health and pediatric care. So if there's one thing I've learned as a nurse practitioner working both in emergency medicine in the US and in humanitarian aid in countries like Mexico, Ukraine, Iraq, Haiti, Jamaica, Sierra Leone, and Guatemala, it's that we can't undo what's happened to someone. But what we can do is we can sit with them in their darkest moments so they aren't alone. GRM believes that everyone deserves the best possible care on the worst day of their life. And support for our organization, like all the amazing organizations here, means that we can continue to make sure that people are seen and heard. Thank you so much.
is incredible. I had the honor of working with them when I was in Matamoros in the U.S.-Mexico border, and just thank you both so much. I want to give you a round of applause one more time, because it's truly amazing. Thank you. This is almost it. This is almost it. We are about to enter into the last phase of today, the closing discussion, which is about women in leadership. And I'll just say this, right? The most obvious thing, which is that representation matters. And I learned that actually in the 2016 presidential campaign. Like, that's where I truly, truly learned the meaning of that, because for the first time, I would say in my career at that point, I walked into a campaign that looked the way that it was supposed to look. Now, who were my bosses? Women. Who was at the table? Women of color. Who were making decisions? Women. That's where I met my partner, Diara, who's over there. And we talk about this all the time, right? About she is Black, Mexican, and we talk about the idea that in no other place have we felt like we've been seen more, heard more, than in those spaces that Secretary Clinton has created. And so, I wanted to say that because that's not the reality everywhere. No, women are not in those positions of leadership the way that we are supposed to be. And so that's why we're about to have this discussion with women that are not just moving the needle, but women that have literally sparked global movements, women that are breaking that glass ceiling, and women that make it possible for us to be in this room. And so this does it for me. It has been an incredible honor to be your host today, and thank you for laughing when you didn't have to. And now it's my incredible honor to welcome 3 women that I deeply admire. We have Secretary Clinton, we have Julia Gillard, former Prime Minister of Australia, and we have Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the former President of Liberia. Thank you all so much.
It's so good. And you want to come.
Now I know.
Well, I think it's been an amazing day, and I'm so grateful to all of our panelists, all of our commitment makers, everybody with a call to action. You've just put together an amazing summit that I've learned a lot from, and I believe can provide a basis for a lot of our work going forward here at the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Presidential Center and Library. But this final conversation is especially meaningful to me because here are 2 of the leaders whom I've had the great privilege and honor of getting to know over years and whom I admire so much. They have taken on some of the hardest challenges in politics. They have had to not only stand against war, misogyny, the political winds, but they've had to figure out, on an almost a constantly challenged basis, how they were going to try to achieve what they believe in. And I have learned so much from each of them. I want to, just start by introducing them to you through each of their brief overview of how they got into politics, what motivated them and inspired them, because I think it's important for all of us, but particularly young people, to hear directly from 2 women who led their governments and did so with, real courage. So, Julia, I'm going to start with you. I was thinking of you as we were listening to Shabana talk about education, because I know one of the roles you had in politics in Australia was as the Minister of Education. But give us an overview of how you got into politics, why you did, and kind of lead us to the point where you became the Prime Minister.
Well, thank you very much. I feel very honoured and privileged to be here, and particularly to be here in this company. As you can tell from my accent, obviously Australian, but I actually wasn't born in Australia. I was born in Wales in the United Kingdom, and I'm of that generation of migrants where people went to Australia looking for a better life. So I've lived in Australia since I was 4. I was the daughter of a very ordinary family. My father ultimately trained in Australia to become a psychiatric nurse. My mother was a cook in a local aged care facility, and there's just my sister and I, and we went to the local government schools. So in many ways it doesn't sound like a very auspicious start for politics, but my father always thought it was important that we understood current affairs, so he would talk to us about politics. And my mother and father always talked to us about the value of education. Neither of them had finished secondary school. My father simply because of poverty in his coal mining village in South Wales. My mother because she was very unwell as a child during the days when there was no system to maintain educational continuity if you were dropping in and out of school because you were sick, and so she drifted away before the end of secondary education. And they're both very intelligent people. They drummed into my sister and I, you know, education, hit the books, study hard, aim high. And I did do those things and got to go to university in my hometown in Adelaide, studying a law degree and an arts degree. And it was in my second year of university that a Conservative government decided that there would be major cutbacks to education. And I thought this was really wrong, that it would jeopardise the ability of kids a lot like me to get to go to university. So I got involved in a student campaign, pretty humble kind of thing, but a student campaign to try and change the government's mind. And they did back down on some of the cuts, not all of them, but some of them. And it gave me the sense that if you raised your voice, if you became involved, if you got active, then you could change things. And fast forwarding the clock, I got more and more involved in student politics, in the Labor Party in Australia, which is the equivalent of the Democrats in Australia. And that led to the birth of ambition that I would like to be in the federal parliament as a Labor representative. And then in a typical political story, between deciding I'd like to do it and getting to do it, that's measured in a decade, where my political party rejected me 3 times as a candidate when I stood on an election slate and wasn't elected. So I ultimately got into the parliament in 1998 and then worked my way through becoming Deputy Prime Minister and then Prime Minister. And in this period of my life, I'm trying to build on those experiences by particularly working on thinking about what we can do to better develop women's leadership around the world.
So Ellen, you had a different pathway, but I would really appreciate your giving us an overview of how you ended up being the first woman elected president of any country in Africa.
Hillary, I'm going to start by thanking you on behalf of the Liberian women for how much they love you and your achievement, and for your visit to our country and the encouragement you provided to them. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to go through the exhibit. Magnificent, extraordinary, no question about it. But then I realized that the thought I had about doing something like that in Liberia was through the driving force of Dr. Alida Black. And that she was here with her team and made sure that she brought my granddaughter and her co-worker to see this. We're going back there tomorrow to really get into a deep dive as to how you managed to put those quilts together. My story is not so unlike yours, Julia. the values one has are normally shaped by your beginnings. And my beginning, family beginning, was one of an indigenous father and a mixed racial mother, and one in which both of my grandmothers lived and died illiterate. I married early, as most young women do in Africa, and I had 4 sons. And I had to care for them and a husband for so many years, watching my co-mates go off to achieve an education, to get college, to come to college in the United States. But my time did come, and improvement in his education status and my beginnings of going beyond high school that I attended in Liberia put me on a different plane. And to just put it briefly, there was no stopping me. Because once I had an education, I wanted to make sure I had a position, much more than a job, but I had a place and a role. And bearing that my family situation also became disastrous because my father died too early, although he was the first indigenous member of the legislature, member of Congress, the representative. My mother had to do everything to care for the children. So I knew that I had to do what it took to succeed and to make sure that I laid the groundwork for my 4 sons to ensure that they too would have an opportunity that my grandparents did not have. How did it start? Well, after education here, I went and I started my career as a public servant. I did finance, remained along that path, perhaps the better part of my life. But then I began to take positions. In effect, I became an activist. And an activist meant that based on your values, you had to question the status quo, question the policies that existed, even as a bona fide employee or executive within the government. And that, of course, set me on a different course. A course in which I was recognized as, someone who always fought the system, always took a strong position against things, but at the same time very conscious that to succeed, you also had to be exemplary in those things you represent and in those things that you do. So it was not only setting yourself to face certain things, but being able to do it with a certain amount of respect. And so, in a way, just one step led to another. And so I served in a junior position in our government. I took part in discussions of policies and was very active in expressing my views as to whether those policies were in the best national interest, whether they provided the rights of protection to people. I came back and did more education and went back to a higher position. And then my continued meddling, continued taking action, finally landed me in jail. Well, after that, you only plan then to come out of jail and make sure you're in a position where you'll never be jailed again.
Well, you also, I think it's fair to say, you were doing a lot of this in the midst of a 14-year civil war. And you ended up in jail in part because you got on the wrong side of some of the, militants and insurrectionists who were in that civil war. But one of the great stories, Ellen, is it was referred to earlier, the way that Liberian women mobilized to end that civil war. Then they stood with you when you ran for president. And, you won the Nobel Peace Prize for your work rebuilding your war-torn nation, because when you became president, you inherited a failed state. It had been at war for 14 years, and you had to rebuild the economy and everything else at the same time. It was like building the plane while you were flying it.
Oh, that's so true. And let me point out that the action that Manir had talked about, how the Liberian women really stood up against the leader at the time, Taylor, who did horrendous things in the country. The main actor in that is someone you may have heard of, Lima Bowie. She gathered a group of women also, and she led the action that boarded all of the warlords in a room and refused to open the door until they all signed a peace accord. Well, we all benefited from that, and we had the Accra Peace Accord that started with the interim government in which I served. And of course, every time I was involved, this was because of women action. Whether it was because I was in jail and thousands of them signed petitions, whether it was because they all stood through the rain and sun to be able to stand up against the leader who was such horrendous. Whether it was in my campaign, it was always women, grassroots women, professional women, always women were the ones that took action. And so winning the presidency, of course, as you said, Hillary, meant inheriting a very difficult situation, destroyed infrastructure, institutions, non-functional institution, very little in terms of the laws that protected and respect for rights. So many deaths and and destruction around, how does one, as a woman, take this after what was a great campaign and a great winning and ensure that you set the nation on course for reconstruction? The greatest difficulty I had was managing expectations. Because we had brought so much in the vision that we articulated, in the agenda that we promoted, that everyone felt finally, after 30 years of extreme poverty and difficulty and not having rights, everything would be great. And it was difficult to say, there's no quick fix. It's going to take long years of continuous action and work. But the good part was that I believed in young people. And so I made great effort to get support for the repatriation of Liberians who were in this country to come back and take positions, to take charge of those policy actions that we needed to have implemented. And I think that was a large measure of our success in doing what we had to do. And of course, the support that we received from your country, from the United States, and from other countries, and from women leaders, not only women leaders in our country and in Africa, but women leaders all over the world. Recognize that one difference is, in this particular case, there was one woman who was elected democratically by an African nation and wanted to see this as an example. And so we did get the level of understanding and support to enable to carry that out. But it was not difficult. It was not easy sailings, never can be. And even before I became president, I had already run before. And I lost tremendously too. But I always said that failure is the upside of success because it emboldens you to correct all your mistakes and to get ready for a longer battle, a more intense effort to be able to achieve your goals.
Well, I can vouch for how excited women around the world were by your election and how privileged I was to work with you. You know, Julia, I wanted to talk about two things. First, your continuing work when you were in office as Prime Minister to support education. But then the speech that you gave, which was such a powerful indictment of misogyny. So let's start with that, because 10 years ago, you, like many women in positions of leadership in our world today, found yourself being attacked, critiqued, derided in the most blatantly sexist terms. I think it is ironic that 10 years on, a lot of the people who subjected you to that treatment have been forced out of government and politics in your country, because finally they were revealed to be what you said they were. Women around the world who viewed your speech or heard about it really took it to heart. Can you describe what led you to make that speech? Because, you know, it's hard. You know, you get hammered, you get critiqued, they say terrible things about you, but if you call them out on it, you're often the worse off for it. It's a very tough calculation to make. So, number one, what led you to make the speech, and how much has changed since you gave it? And do you think more women should do more to respond directly when they are discounted or attacked, as you were?
Thank you for that question. I'm very happy to answer it. I should say to any of you who haven't read Ellen's memoir about her life, please do, because we could listen to her for forever. It's an amazing life. And one of the things that comes out very strongly is she knows how to give a hell of a speech. And many of her speeches have been nation-changing and led to periods of exile and things like that. So knows how to give a dramatic speech. In my own way, I gave a speech 10 years ago. We had the 10-year anniversary in October this year, and looking back on it now, what I see in that speech is really my frustration about being treated in such a gendered way as a Prime Minister. And when I left office, I said that, you know, gender didn't explain everything about my Prime Ministership, but it did explain some things. And these things are always complicated. You know, politics is a difficult business. You never get to run the control test and watch a man and a woman in identical circumstances and then get to feel the thread of what is gender. But I knew during the days of my Prime Ministership that I was being treated very differently. And it was everything from a relentless focus on appearance, a relentless focus on family structures. I don't have children. I learned early on in politics that there's no right answer to the question, do you have children? It is unanswerable. If you don't, then what sort of woman chooses not to have children? If you do, well, who is looking after them? While you get about this business of politics. But then there are these sort of more deeper seated perceptions where really the gendered environment, the sexist environment that we've all grown up in has put in the back of our brains stereotypes about what women are supposed to be like, and we are easily discomforted by a woman who is wielding power, and we easily conclude that she is not likeable, that there's something a bit different about her. I mean, Secretary Clinton, in her books writing about her election, you know, the people when they were polled would always say, there's just something about her. Well, the something about her is that they're uncomfortable with a woman holding power. So I was trying to navigate this environment, and there were times when it got truly crazy when people were standing at rallies holding up signs describing me as a bitch or a witch. My father died when I was Prime Minister, and it was asserted by a leading media personality that he died of shame because he was so ashamed of me. So right in the days that my family was dealing with the depths of that grief, we had to deal with that media storm as well. And so it went. And I had made a decision early in my Prime Ministership that it was just so obvious that I was the first woman to do this job that I didn't need to wander around going, oh, anybody tell you I'm the first woman doing this job? That, you know, that it would probably have some gendered reactions at the start. Naive old me, I look back on it now, but I thought it would have some gendered reactions at the start, but the more I did the job, the more it would become politics as usual because people would get used to seeing a woman do the job. What actually happened was the longer I did the job, the government, you know, did some controversial policies, particularly some big actions on climate change. Then the gendered insult became the absolute go-to weapon in political debate. And having not called it out for so long, then it was hard to call it out out when the government was in choppy political water, because you were just going to get the reaction, well, she would say that, wouldn't she, because she's trying to distract from the fact that the government's in problems on climate policy or whatever else. In Australian Parliament, we have this political theatre, hard-hitting political theatre every day of question time, where you go to the Parliament and you can be asked any question without notice, and it's usually the Prime Minister who takes most of those questions. And through a series of circumstances, there was a day 10 years ago when I knew that the theme of the day was going to be sexism, and I was matched against Tony Abbott, the leader of the opposition. So I'd asked my staff to give me Tony Abbott's top 10 sexist quotes, and I've joked since that this was a task they acquitted in record time. I'd asked them to do far more complicated things in the past. And I went to the Parliament sort of ready to use these quotes as flourishes when I was asked questions. But what actually happened is the Leader of the Opposition, Tony Abbott, moved for an immediate parliamentary debate. And so the speech that's come to be known as the misogyny speech is my off-the-cuff, in-the-moment reply in that debate. And I think it's come to still be talked about. I mean, if you told me at the time we'd still be talking about it 10 years later, I would never have believed you. But I think it's come to mean something to women, because every woman knows what it's like to hit a gendered moment and to feel that frustration of, you know, should I say something, shouldn't I say something, waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning going, oh, if only I'd said that. It was, you know, a time where I had an opportunity to really call it out. And I do think a lot of things have got better since. You know, the Me Too movement, Hillary, your campaign in 2016 and how gendered that was. I think so many scales have come off people's eyes, and, you know, instead of just not seeing when a woman is being discriminated against, held to a different standard, we now do see it, and more women and men enter the public square to defend a woman who's in those circumstances. So I think a lot has changed, but there is still so much more to do if we're going to equalise treatment for men and women as they aspire for leadership. And whilst we're having the right conversation now, there's also this seamy underside in social media that's just got worse and worse. And social media was starting to be a politically shaping device when I was Prime Minister, but now, of course, it is so much what sets the political temper of the times, and it is a toxic environment for women, and any piece of research on social media tells us that. And so we've still got much to do in the more traditional ways, but we've also got to deal with this sort of misogynistic sewer of stuff that is underneath.
Well, for anyone who hasn't seen the speech, you can Google it because it's really worth it. But I just want to pick up a little bit on what you said at the end, Julia, because in my talking with women in public life in not only my own country, but elsewhere in the world, the role that social media is now playing to intimidate women, to really frighten them about being in the public arena, I think is having a chilling effect. And you've written a best-selling book called Women in Leadership, and you founded the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London University and the Australian National University. And I've been privileged to visit you at King's College London. What have you learned from this work? I mean, what would be the takeaways based on your own experience and now really your surveying of women and leadership in the world today that, you know, would give us some guidance about how women should think about entering into public life, how women should prepare to lead? What have you taken away from this very important work you're doing now?
Yeah, if I was going to try and summarise it really quickly, research that we do at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, and our director, Professor Rosie Campbell, is here. Research shows, first and foremost, that women being in politics matters, that parliaments that have more women in them are correlated with less corruption, more social sector expenditure, so they make a real difference for women's lives. So having women in Parliament, in politics matters. Role modelling certainly matters. I know that from my own experience, and we can show that from research. When I was there in Australian politics, the interest of young women in politics went up. So it does matter that people can look up and see women. Political parties being thoughtful about their structures and the way that they go about getting women into politics can make a difference. For some parts of the world, that will be about setting targets and quotas, but that can certainly turbocharge a political party, a political institution, from being predominantly male to being more equitably represented. And I know in my own nation, my own political party is now at half men, half women in the national parliament, whereas if we go back before we had our affirmative action rule, we were only at 14%, 14% women. So having an affirmative action rule has made a huge difference. What women see in the media does shape views and shape perceptions about whether or not they want to be in politics. And I should say that of the stuff that gets analysed on social media through research, you can absolutely show that the most toxic stuff is disproportionately directed at women, and it's disproportionately directed at women of colour. And so there is a double burden here that comes on, and it is on the minds of women thinking about whether or not they want to go into politics. We do so much more. We look at women at work. We look at all of the data around the world about where women are in leadership. But out of those things, I think that there are some positive things we can think about as to how to shape politics. And I do think, particularly at this time of change in social media, we've got to be very front-footed on the campaign to demand that social media companies show some self-restraint, or if they don't show self-restraint, that globally we look to regulate this space. I mean, at the end of the day, I could not take an advertisement out in an American newspaper tomorrow or an Australian newspaper threatening to kill or rape someone. I would not be sold ad space to put that in a newspaper, but reunited with my phone, I could tweet that in the next 15 seconds. And we've really got to ask ourselves, why do we accept such differential rules when they are clearly putting so much pressure on women? And, you know, Ellen is someone who's shown absolute physical courage. She's been imprisoned, her life has been threatened. So to some extent, I'm conscious that seeing nasty things written about yourself on social media might be seen as a problem of a different order. But I do think we've got to recognise this toxicity doesn't stay just in the virtual world. Many women would be able to say they had received a death threat or a rape threat, complete with a photo of their front door. So, you know, this is people transcending that divide between what's online and what is really going to come and harm you in the physical world. So we must do better at this. And I think the direction of travel, unless there is a lot of campaigning now, unfortunately, because of changing ownership at Twitter, is ever to the worse rather than to the better.
Amen to that. I wanted to just follow up with Ellen on the challenges to democracy and the rise of authoritarianism, and how difficult it is to lead in a setting where you know that there are a lot of people trying to bring you down, a lot of people who are in positions of power trying to prevent you from being successful. And I have to say, Ellen, you know, when I went to your second inauguration and you asked me to speak to the Liberian legislature, And you said to me that, you know, a lot of the people in the legislature that I was going to be standing up in front of and speaking to were people that were not your allies. In fact, some of them were former warlords, related to former warlords, but you had to work with them. And so you wanted me to go talk about freedom and democracy and working together and how people get things done, which I was more than happy to do. But I remember standing in the parliament after the most amazing introductory activities like blowing on the conch and, you know, all of the things that were going on. It was really incredible. And I'm standing up there and I'm looking out at people who you had pointed out to me, like, oh yeah, he's a former warlord, not in prison, in the Congress. And yet you believed so strongly in democracy and in what you were trying to achieve in Liberia that you were determined to keep working with them and get as much done as you could. So how do you think now about the rise of authoritarianism, the need to stay focused on democracy, preserve it, and make it work?
We had no choice. I had no choice. Inheriting a nation where those who were warlords or many of their collaborators were now members of Congress, members of Parliament, making laws, being able to formulate policies. But we also knew that unless we were able to go further than they could in being able to set the examples, to set the systems and the rules that we wanted, then we would be defeated. And so, yes, it did take a lot of reconciliation up to a point of being able to reach out to some of them. If you needed to get a bill passed in the interest, it did take fighting all the cultural obstruction in our countries, where culture plays such a big part. Tradition and practices like respect for women, being able to go beyond that. I knew that in my case, I had to also start to prepare a generation that had been left behind, and those were girls. So one of my first policy action was to make primary education free and compulsory. And with that, I was able to be able to reach out to the mothers and to get the support of the mothers. But there were times in this process of managing these expectations and trying to succeed in the implementation of your goals that you had to show power. Sometimes women don't like to hear that word. We like to talk about influence. And that's good. If we can influence everything, great. But there are times when they have to know that you're going to crack the whip. And so I had an occasion where we had men that had been taken out of the army. These were all those who were rebel soldiers. With the support, we were able to find a way to take the guns away from them and to rebuild a whole new army. And then a group of soldiers who felt they had been disbanded illegally and unfairly, determined that, you know, they were going to make sure they challenged me and they're going to bring me down, and make sure that they deposed me because I had denied them the benefits they felt they rightfully deserved. And so they gathered outside, and Of course, security don't like for you to go into a location like that. Your security keeps. But I decided I would go and face them. And after they spoke, it was a matter of saying to them, you know, you're asking for benefits. That's fine. But you're going to tell me the level of benefits I'm going to give to all the people you killed, you know, or all the women that you raped. And if you can't tell me the benefits for them, then the benefits of you will not be a benefit. It's going to be some action against you, you know. So you had to challenge those things to be able to achieve what you wanted. If I may say a word about social media, Julia, you just mentioned, because we all face that. Social media really is meant to be a strong tool of communication, a strong tool of education and information. Today, of course, social media has just, at least within the context of our countries and our continent, just has so much junk in it that is going to either become irrelevant or regularized, one or the other. That will have to be done. And coming to your point, Hillary, about the challenge to democracy. Africa spent a long time moving away from dictatorship, from military rule, to democracy. Today, we have over 30 countries practicing democracy. And why we have a problem with term limits and those who don't know when it's time to stop and to quit. We believe that we were following the standards, international standards, that have been set by the more powerful democracies of the world, the United States, the United Kingdom, India, South Africa from our own continent, and felt we were on the right track. But in the last 5 years, close to 10 years, we all begin to look at the complexities, the confusion that exists from those that really carry the standards. And that's having some major negative effect on our progress, because already we have had on the African continent 4 coups d'etats, something we had long thought that we had progressed beyond. We're now facing that. We're fast facing those that are questioning whether indeed we should have term limits. You know, that there should be the opportunity for us to give leadership to the younger generation and to quit when we've achieved a certain amount of our goals. It's for me, a real issue. And I hope it's for everyone a real issue, because if autocracy is coming back, then you can be assured that the progress that we have made and the work we are all doing to promote the equality, to bring women into higher positions, we'll get to a place where we will not have just one woman or a few women who stand out as having achieved high leadership position. But it will be natural for anyone to compete, anytime, anywhere, any subject. And if they have the stamina and the self-confidence and the capabilities to be able to compete, and that's all we ask for, the right to compete, that they should have the opportunity to do so. And if we don't protect and safeguard democracies, I'm afraid the prediction about it will take us 130 years to achieve gender equality, 140 years to achieve gender equality, we are then beginning to accept that as a given. And one of what we must do is challenge that prediction. We should not say that. We should challenge it. But to challenge it means each of us have to see it as a personal commitment within your own sphere, within your own realm, within your own comfort zone, to go past your fears and to challenge and to stand out and to compete and to claim your right to own every position at every level in society that's available. So I think that's a challenge for all of us. And I do believe that my own prediction is to just wait until we have the next woman president in Africa, to invite all of you to come to that celebration.
Yay, we're coming. You know, and in fact, Ellen,
We gotta work at it, Hillary.
we got to do it. I mean, Ellen's building the Presidential Center for Women's Leadership and Development. Well, we've gotten to that point where I'm going to ask each of you to give us your call to action. So, Julia?
Well, my call to action really picks up off what Ellen's just said about the, 130, 140-year time frames. I mean, I'm leaving today with a real sense of energy about how much is happening, but also with a real sense of how much more we've got to do, and the delight that we have when we come together and we get to learn from each other. And so in that spirit, my call to action is that we do invest in the evidence and the research about what has the biggest impact in gender equality. We want to make that time frame so much shorter. That means that we need to get ever better, more efficient, more focused at what we do together, and that does take evidence and research, and that even when we can't be in the same room, that we are investing in sharing it. And certainly from the point of view of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, we want to be there doing that, but doing it with others, doing it with everyone here.
Great. And Ellen, final word, call to action.
My call to action is to get us all involved and to urge all of the leaders of all countries to undertake the legal and policy actions that will ensure the promotion of women and the protection of girls. But please let me say that I know that one of the most difficult things to achieve from statements like that is to carry out the implementation, even when there are laws in their regulations, implementation. And so our center is going to try to go one step forward to do some traffic lights so that we can identify who's in the red zone and the yellow zone and the green zone in terms of countries that rally within, particularly our sub-region, the ECOWAS countries, where we're trying to work on the data to make sure that we can point where there are countries that have gone beyond just the action, but have seen implementation of some of them, and to be able to use this as an example to encourage others to be able to move on those laws and policies.
Well, I cannot think of a better note to end on, and I can promise both Ellen and Julia and all of you that we will do exactly what they have challenged us to do and continue to work together and continue to, find the best paths forward and to hold people accountable for what they have not done and to celebrate what they are doing. As we come to a close here, I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsors. On the back of your program for the day are the list of our sponsors, and we could not have done any of this without them. So could we have a big round of applause for all of our sponsors? And finally, I feel like we have such a rich amount of information that we've been given today, lots of incredible ideas and models for us to look at and learn from. And it's very much what I will be, continuing to do in my work with the foundation and with the Presidential Center. And I'm, as you just heard from our two extraordinary closing panelists, I'm very energized. I'm very energized, and I want people to stay energized about what we can and should be doing together here at home, around the world, to, in Ellen's words, pursue an agenda for the promotion of women and the protection of girls. And I'm excited by what we can end up doing together. So thank you all so much for being here with us today.